Dr David Cavan, a consultant endocrinologist, is the former medical director of the International Diabetes Federation. He's a speaker and writer about health and diet issues, not just for people with diabetes, but for all of us. He believes that Christians and people of faith have a special responsibility in making choices about what we eat and drink. David Hallam of City Road Methodist Church in Birmingham asked if it was true that people with diabetes were more likely to catch COVID-19 and then more likely for it to prove fatal.
That's absolutely right. And it's the same pretty much with any infection. Anyone with diabetes will be aware that if there's something going around, a virus, then they're more likely to get it maybe than others around them. And if they do, they might be affected slightly more seriously. If someone with diabetes gets a cut, it might take longer to heal than someone without diabetes. And so at that level, just having diabetes does mean that you're more likely to get an infection that's going around. And it's thought that having diabetes affects the immune system in some way to explain that. But then if you do get COVID-19, there is now a lot of information that's come through to suggest that people with diabetes they make up quite a large proportion of people who actually sadly do quite badly, and that's hit the headlines quite a lot recently, and understandably has created quite a lot of anxiety. But I think it's really important to understand that it's not just having the diabetes that may mean that you will get it more seriously. It's how well the diabetes is controlled. It's whether there are other underlying conditions or associated conditions. So, for example, people whose blood sugar levels are generally much higher are likely to do worse than people whose sugar levels are much more normal. People who have underlying problems with their kidneys or their hearts, for example, similarly don't do so well. And people who are significantly overweight also do not do so well. And that applies whether you've got diabetes or not. It's one of the likely reasons, for example, that Boris Johnson was so unwell, because he is really quite overweight, whereas some of his other colleagues who got it, as we know, because it's been a lot in the news recently, are not overweight and they didn't have it quite so badly.
So the message there is that whether we've got diabetes or not, we should be very, very careful about our weight and about our diet and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some other factors that influence your risk. So, for example, we know people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged from poorer backgrounds will do less well. People from ethnic minorities do less well, and those things are less easy to change. But certainly there is an association whether or not you have diabetes. That if you're overweight, then that is associated with increased risk, and if you have diabetes and your blood sugar levels are high, that is. So, and there is something you can do about that. It might not necessarily be easy, but there are plenty of people who've shown that they can lose weight, and they can lose weight quite quickly if they have the right information, and that in itself will significantly reduce their risk.
Right, so we have a lot of people in our church at the moment who are self-isolating at home. They're shielding because they have underlying health conditions. I must admit, since I've been on lockdown, I've put back on weight. So what should we do while we're in lockdown?
Well, that's a really, really good question. And part of what happens to us all as human beings is, we adapt to our environments, and if we live in an environment where the food is very healthy, we tend to eat healthy food. If it's an environment where food is very unhealthy, we eat unhealthy food, and so our environment changes our behavior. And if you suddenly have your environment change, i.e. you're stuck indoors, then that is going to change your behavior if you're normally someone who goes out quite a lot. It's interesting. I was speaking to someone, a patient actually, just yesterday, who was saying he's in exactly that situation. He's quite elderly. He has diabetes, and he's shielding, and he has meals delivered to him. And those meals are all causing his diabetes to get out of control. He said, every time I eat these meals, my sugar level goes up really high. And I couldn't, because it was a phone consultation, I couldn't get it all the information, but it really just highlighted how he is totally dependent on food that other people are bringing to him, but what they're bringing is not at all suitable for his needs.
So we still have to be very, very careful about our diet. What about exercise?
So we do, well, exercise is important, but and a lot of people are not getting, so particularly if they're shielding and staying in their home, they're not getting the exercise that they would otherwise, unless they've got an exercise machine. But very often people think, oh, I've got to be exercising, I've got to be exercising. You know, the biggest impact on weight in someone who is overweight is not exercise. And exercise in some senses could be counterproductive. You know, if you're very overweight and you start running or going to the gym, you could injure yourself. But by making some changes to what you eat, you can make some really big inroads to help you lose weight. And if someone is in that situation, and I did a survey actually online, a very simple survey in the last few weeks, just asking people with diabetes what's happening in lockdown to them. Some people are losing weight because they're being more active. Some people are gaining weight and it's all because of, you know, the environment and the way they're living has changed. But of course, the really sad thing is those people who have diabetes and are gaining weight are increasing their risk if they do get COVID-19. So my message really is to want to help people identify what they can do, even if they're locked down, even if they can't get out of their house. What can they do that will help them lose weight without exercise, and therefore help reduce their risk of COVID-19?
Now, one of the other things I'm hearing is that a lot of my friends, we joke about it on Zoom conversations, we joke about it online. Oh, they're drinking more.
Yes.
How dangerous is that to health?
Well, that's not a straightforward question to answer. So the official line, as we all know, is that we shouldn't be drinking more than, I think it's 2 units a day, 14 units a week, which by many people's standards is not very much, and it's actually come down from what it was a few years ago. But what I would say is, if you're drinking really to excess and you're drinking, you know, a large amount several days a week, then that clearly is bad for your health. But rather than the amount, it's probably also in what form you're taking it. Now, you know, we might have certain stereotypes about how we view the French, maybe, or the Italians. You know, they drink a lot of wine, they drink a lot of red wine. It's part of what is known as the Mediterranean diet, which is actually highlighted as being one of the healthiest forms of eating. And very interestingly, there was a study that was looking at the Mediterranean diet that I read a few years ago. And part of that diet, a lot of people would love this, was, you know, usually plenty of, you know, fresh fish, nuts, olives, vegetables, and red wine every evening. It was you must drink red wine every evening. There was no upper limit. And so I think it's the context in the overall diet. And red wine is probably in this regard less harmful than drinking a similar amount of alcohol in beer. Because in beer, you have a lot of carbohydrates, and what we now understand, increasingly so, is that part of the problems that drive obesity are metabolic problems relating to insulin and carbohydrates, and taking a lot of beer will aggravate that.
You and I, we both share a Christian faith. Is there a Christian message here about our diet at all, or what? Well, if you haven't got diabetes, is it all right to go down and have chips and go to the Big Mac and so on?
I think they're two different questions. So to answer the second one, because it's probably the easy one, at the end of the day, we all do as individuals what we want to do. We eat what we want to do. You know, we're inherently, in a sense, perhaps a little bit stubborn, a little bit selfish. If we really want to go down and have chips, we'll have some chips. But if you've got diabetes, you need to know that those chips will make your blood sugar level go up, and that will make, and they'll also therefore make you more likely to gain weight.
Mm.
And so, rather than giving very negative messages saying, well, you can't eat chips, you can't eat bags of sweets or chocolate, I'd rather turn it around and say, well, yeah, you can eat these things, but these are the consequences if you do. But how about we help find some other treats, if you like, or types of food that you really enjoy that won't have that effect? And a lot of people are quite surprised when I said, well, do you like cheese? Because, you know, you could eat cheese, that will have no effect on your blood sugar level. And, that's just as an example. So actually giving alternatives that aren't necessarily seen as being, healthy salad leaves, but enjoyable, but that won't have an adverse effect. Turning to your point about Christian faith, it struck me that, I think as Christians, it says that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit and we should look after them. And I'm aware that, a lot of Christians will talk about, psychological health and mental health and spiritual health, and big churches will put on courses to help with all of these. And yet they'll serve donuts as you go in and biscuits as you come out. And it's almost as though we just are not focused on the fact that we're living in an environment where this sort of food is promoting a real epidemic, if you like. We're in a pandemic, an infectious pandemic at the moment, but the diabetes epidemic is all around us, and it's being fueled by certain types of food that actually I think people should understand. I'd like people to understand they're just not good for you. They are actually harmful. And especially if you have diabetes or if you're overweight, carrying on, eating very sugary foods or big bags of chips, as you put it, it's harmful.
So part of our Christian witness to ourselves is that we should look after our own bodies.
The levels of obesity that we have directly result from the type of foods that we have available. But I think that if people need to understand the impact of those foods so they can then make the choices that say, look, if you want to look after your body, there are certain foods that are going to help you do it. And on the other hand, there are other foods that are actually going to be harmful.
So that's what we need to do. We need to really work out that food can actually be harmful, whereas we're trained to think that food is always good.
Well, absolutely. And I think it almost calls into question the definition of food. So if you go back and look in the Bible at the foods they had available, it was really by definition, it was fresh fish, fresh meats, olives, locusts, and things like that. Nothing came in a package, nothing came out of a processing plant. Sugar didn't exist. The nearest reference is, of course, honey. But even there's a reference somewhere that don't eat too much honey, but otherwise you'll vomit. So one of the proverbs, there's a recognition that too much sugar, in that case, the form of honey, is actually bad for you. So understanding that anything that comes out of a packet, anything that's pre-processed, it's not real food. Right. And going back to thinking, well, what is real food? What are the meals that maybe our parents and grandparents would have eaten? Meat and two veg, fresh vegetables in season, fresh fruit even in season, even though some fruits nowadays are so full of sugar because of the way they've been developed. They're not necessarily as healthy as we might think they are. And get back to what actually is food, rather than eating something because it's been sold to us in a bright package and lots of marketing behind it.
Well, you've certainly given us lots of food for thought, as they say. Thank you, David Cavan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us online at City Road Methodist Church, Birmingham. If you'd like to know more about us, go to our website www.cityroad.org.uk or find us on Facebook and Twitter.